What's up, guys? I'm Rooster. This is Monkey. Here working on the Ranger today. We're going to start with doing the wheel bearings. We're going to walk you step by step how to repack and then adjust the front wheel bearings on a 1998 through 2001 Ford Ranger. Okay guys, so we've got the Ranger here. What we're going to be going over today is how to remove and repack and adjust the wheel bearing. We're going to be working on the passenger side of this Ranger to go over it. First, what we need to do is the tools that we're going to use. We're going to have our 1/2 inch ratchet here with a 1/16. This is going to take the retaining nut off of the top of the bearing. You've got your 15mm socket, which is what you're gonna use to take the brake calipers off. You've got side cutters just to work the cotter pin if you don't have those, any needle nose pliers, whatever you can use to get that off. Flat-headed screwdriver just for getting the dust cap off and the seal off and such. Pick just makes it easier when you get the retaining plate off behind the bearing retaining nut, and then a hammer just to help loosen things up. As long as an extension, just because the top brake caliper bolt is up in the spindle, so you need to be able to get around to it if you don't have a deep socket. All right, first things first, what we're going to do, keep going. First things first, what we're going to do is we're going to take off the dust cap. It's very simple. You just kind of need to get in there a little bit so you can get behind it. It's pretty tough, but you know, if you do mess this up, that's okay. You can get one of these for just a few dollars from your local parts store. Most of the time they have them in stock. You'll feel it kind of bite in and get stiff like that and hold itself, and you just kind of work it out. Once you've got a little groove there, you just can turn the screwdriver, kind of go around, loosen it up. A lot of times they're pretty tight on there if it's not been done in a while. Once you can get the screwdriver all the way wide, just turn it to completely pop it off. You may need to tap it out. All right. Next thing, you've got a cotter pin. You'll see it going through the top around the castle nut here. Just bend this out of the way. Be careful with it if you're planning on reusing it, but I always do recommend to replace cotter pins anytime, just because sometimes they can get brittle by pulling them out or if they get too old. Get the castle nut off here. And then, now don't be afraid, a lot of times you can even get these, especially if they're out of adjustment, you can actually pull them off by hand. As you can tell, that's already all the way loose. All right. You take the brake caliper off. All right, so we're gonna leave that sit just for a moment, because I do need to go ahead and pull the brake caliper off. I should have done it before I pulled the cap off, but it's really not too big a deal. $15mm on the top, get that loose, and 15mm on the bottom, which you'll have to take the extension off for. What we're doing is we're leaving the caliper attached to the bracket. There's really no reason to take this off, but if it's something that you're going to be taking your brakes off anyway, a lot of times it's just a good idea to go ahead and repack the bearings since you're in there. Make sure you support the caliper just so it doesn't fall off and you stretch the brake fluid hose. Sometimes it kind of gets brittle on older vehicles and you don't want to give it a reason to leak. What I recommend is just getting a little bungee cord, wrapping it around the upper control arm. So when you pull the brake caliper off, just support it, you know, kind of get it on there anyway that you can here. And again, what you'll see, just so you don't put any stress on that. All right. Get the little pick. It just makes it easier just to kind of get behind it and bring it out. All right. Be careful. What you want to do is just slide caliper out a little bit, push it back in, pull the bearing out, set it somewhere clean where it's not going to get any debris, and then pull your rotor off. That's redone. You can see it's pretty dirty in some places, but it does have some red in there. So this has probably been done sometimes in the past, but it had some play in it, so we were going to adjust it anyway. You want to be very gentle. I do recommend that you replace this seal if you're going to be in there, but if you don't have one or the parts store doesn't have one, just be very careful prying it up. I don't want to fuck this up, dude. Damage this. Be very, very careful if you're going to have to reuse it like we are, just to not damage the seal. Once you've got it raised up all the way around just by tapping into it, just be very gentle and rock just your screwdriver side to side. Until it pops up. What you're really checking for is this outer edge. The outer edge may get a little bit dented, but as long as your center point here is nice and round and you don't damage the inside surface as well, it should still seal. After that, you just pull the old bearing out of the top.
Alright guys, so we're going to be packing these wheel bearings. You're going to want to clean all the old grease off of these wheel bearings before you try to pack them with new. You don't have to get all of it out. If you want to, you can parts washer if you have access to one, or brake clean them to get them clean. We have brake clean, but not a lot of it, and I don't have access to a parts washer, so I'm just going to clean them off and then use the new grease pushing through to push the old grease back out of the top. And most of the time when you're doing this, you'll be able to tell when you're pushing through with the new grease what's the new grease and what's the old grease, because the old grease is usually pretty nasty and the new grease looks nice and fresh. So, all right. So they sell these fancy bearing packers that you can buy at the parts store. They're, I think, 15, 20 bucks. They work really well, but I've never bought one because I've packed bearings maybe 10 times in my entire 12-year career working on cars, and it's never been like at the shop working on a customer's car. It's always a friend's car, something I own or whatever. So I've never bought one because I never really found it necessary because I wasn't doing production wheel bearing repacking. And I was taught when I started out how to do it the way I'm about to show you guys, and it works pretty well, so I don't really see much of a need for getting a wheel bearing packer. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to load the palm of your hand up with grease, with new grease. And then all you're going to do is you're going to take the bearing, where you can see these bearings in the bottom between the inner race and the outer race, and you're going to push it into the grease in the palm of your hand. And what it does is it pushes the grease up through the bearing. Then take all this excess grease off, put it back in the palm of your hand, go back around and push through again. And you'll be able to tell, as you can see right here, see how there's nice new red grease there, and over here it's gray? In that area where there's new red grease, it's actually pushed the grease all the way up behind and pushed the old grease out, and that's, you're seeing new grease right there. You're just going to do that all the way around. Get new grease coming out the top all the way around. And then once you have new grease coming out the top all the way around, you're done. The only downside to this, doing things this way, is this is somewhat wasteful of grease because obviously it's all over my fingers and hand, and I'm not going to use all of it, whereas the bearing packer, you just drop it in. I actually put a link in this video to the bearing packer. Like I said, they're not too expensive. If you want to buy one, you can. I'm just not a big fan of it just because this works pretty well and no extra tools are required. Big fan of doing things and not having to spend a ton of money. So. Alright guys, we got that wheel bearing packed. I packed the other inside bearing just the same way I packed the other one, just working the grease through. Slowly but surely, you'll push all the old grease out the other side. Clean it off the best you can. If you don't have brake clean helps a little bit. Push the grease, clean the brake clean off. Clean the grease off of the brake clean, get it all cleaned off. And then whatever you don't get that's in behind those roller bearings, inside the cage and all that stuff, when you push the new grease in from the bottom, it'll push the old stuff out the top, and you can scrape that off and wipe it off on a rag just so you're not mixing the old grease back in. So we got all new grease pushed through all the bearings. We got to tap the seal back in and then put the rotor back on. Then we're going to show you how to tighten it up.
All right, guys. Carl just finished getting the bearings packed. I'm going to go ahead and reassemble, go through everything. He did just drop the bearing back in here. Very simple. You just drop it back in by hand. And go ahead and grab the seal that you took out earlier. Be gentle with it. You're going to have to tap it back in with a hammer. Don't go overkill. Use a small hammer. Kind of tap around in a circle. Until it's flush all the way around. Once you got that, take just a little bit of grease, nothing much. Put it around the shaft, just make sure it's lubricated. A little bit on the back there. Alright. Do your best not to get bearing grease on the rotors, but this is precautionary. This way you have the brake clean. We'll make sure to wipe that off before we put the brakes back on. Be very careful not to damage the shaft. Try to go back on as straight and square as you can until it fits all the way in the back. Press in. Make sure you're holding it back so it's riding on the bearing itself. Slide the bearing. Make sure small side goes in first. till it's all the way flat. This, if you'll notice, it's got two flat sides here and here, so it does not rotate. Slide it back over. Then you put the axle nut back on here. All right, so I got that all the way tightened. So what Ford wants you to do is they want you to use a torque wrench. They want you, first thing to do is tighten this to 18 foot-pounds. Then back it off half a turn, and then after you spin it, so they want you to tighten it to 18 foot-pounds. They want you to spin it like this, and they want you to back it off half a turn, and then tighten it to 22 inch-pounds. It's not very tight. We don't have a torque wrench, but we've got a pretty good feel just out of experience what it's going to be. You're not going to tighten it very much, just snug it up, take it off. You can tell because there will be no forward or back motion on the rotor. We're just going to spin it. That seats all the bearing. And take this, and you see it, half turn. So just go exactly 1/2. And then 22 inch-pounds, again, is not very much. You're going to get that finger tight. If you watch this when we took it off, you can do it by finger. So you just take it, about as tight as you can get it, just barehanded like that, and ratchet. That should be tight. If you really wanted to, you can back this out by fingers. Okay, so once it's down, I'm going to take the castle nut, slide the castle nut back over it. Make sure you bend the cotter pin so it doesn't come loose. And take the grease cap. That's just a little bit off round. Can't really get that too much. All right. Get it straightened out. Again, if you do bend these too bad, you can get a new one relatively cheap, just a couple dollars. Get lined up.
About that back off.
Hmm?
You're gonna have to pop it back off. Get it straight.
Didn't go back in square, so got it in 1-2 side too much. Got to make sure it goes in nice and flat. That's why you saw me try to use the back of the hammer. Okay, should fit all the way flush back up here to make sure no grease leaks. And that's about all that you have to do for the wheel bearing. We'll go ahead and attach the brakes here. Dirty rag. All right. Brake cleaner. Don't want any bearing grease getting onto those pads. So just give it a quick clean. Get that clean. Careful not to put too much stress on that hose. Slide the brakes back into place. Let's get the bottom started in these just because it's easier because you got so little space to fit in the spindle on the top. Get that bottom one started. the lower one. Alright, now all we have to do is pop the wheel back on and we'll be good to go. Alright guys, so we just finished up with the Ranger, got both wheel bearings done in the front. That's about all that we're working on today. What do we have for next weekend?
I don't even know. I got all the stuff I got to do to course.
Alright, well guys, stay tuned. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Pick up the Instagram at
CS Auto Works.
And we'll see you next week in the garage.